Good evening, everyone, and I welcome you to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. As we begin, on behalf of the council and the town, I want to offer our condolences to Constable Mark Pinizzotto's family, his friends, his colleagues, and his teammates, and to the many people across our community he touched as a coach and a trainer with the Oakville Blades and the Rangers. 4 days ago, Constable Pinizzotto, 43 years old, did not come home to his family. He was killed in the line of duty, serving the city of Toronto, doing work that most of us will never have to do. His chief said it plainly, and I quote, "No words can capture what that means to a family who expected him to come home." And in his honor, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence. Thank you, everybody. Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets this evening?
No regrets, Mayor Burton.
Thank you very much. Councilor, are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Madam Clerk, there are none. Council, could we get a mover and seconder to accept the minutes of the regular session of the Planning and Development Council from June 1st? Councilor Dudek and Councilor Giddings, thank you. Any objection? There being none, Madam Clerk, the minutes are adopted. We have one consent item, the Canada-Ontario Development Charges Reduction Program. And we have staff available if there are questions. I would like to just set this up first. If we do not wish to participate, the proper motion is to receive the report. If a member of council wants council to consider participating, then the proper motion would be to move a motion that we apply or that we make an application. Councillor Elgar, I see your hand.
Mayor Burton, yes, thank you. And I'd like to thank staff for the report and how it was written. I don't think people realize just what kind of gifts we're getting lately from the province and the federal government. But it started in 1997 with the Development Charges Act, where we automatically had to subsidize 10% for the cost of growth. Then it went on with Bill 108 in 2019. And I think we got it from our commissioner at the end of the year that has cost us $22.3 million. Then you move on to Bill 23, and so far that's cost us $14 million. And then we have a parkland freeze, the dedication cut back of $21 million. So we're at over $57.7 million. And you look at what they're proposing right now with this marvelous little additional bill. Even the AMO and CMHC state that they estimate only 1 to 5% of the project will become viable, with a 50 to 60% reduction in DCs. And I could go on, but I think the classical term is we receive and put it in a circular file. But I think this one we should receive and file horizontally. And I commend staff for not coming up with anything different than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dudek? Thank you. So the motion is to receive. Is there any objection? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The motion is received. We are, welcome, Councillor Knoll. We're going to, I'm announcing that the public presentation item 13.1, which we had scheduled for tonight, is being rescheduled for a later meeting. And that brings us to the confidential consent item. I would suggest that based on advice from legal, I would suggest that the thing to do here is just to move in public to receive the report. Could I have that motion? Councillor Adams, and seconded by Councillor Haslett-Teal. Thank you. Is there any objection? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, that is received. And that brings us to item 7.1. This is our public hearing item There's a public meeting report for 3043 6th line, and this is an application for an official plan amendment and also a zoning change, if I read this correctly. We have, so first I'll explain to the public who may be watching that the purpose of this session is not to make a decision on the application, but to have the applicant explain it in public and for the council and public to share their concerns about it so that planning staff can make note of those concerns and deal with them in their subsequent recommendation report, which will follow in due course. So we will start with a presentation by Mr. Paul Demchak, who's acting for the applicant, and then we'll hear from our two registered delegations, and I will poll the audience for additional after that. Mr. Demchak, welcome. It's good to see you again.
Good evening, Mayor Burton and members of council. Thank you. I have prepared a brief presentation for this evening. So my name is Paul Demchak with Batory Planning and Management. I am the planning consultant here on behalf of the applicant. I'll note that the owner of the property is Mutual Developments, and Sweeney & Co. Architects are the principal architects on the project. And so the mayor correctly pointed out that this application this evening is recommended. That is being recommended. There is no decision being recommended for the meeting, and it's intended to provide for an opportunity for feedback from the public, and more importantly for us as the project team to intake that feedback from staff, the public, and commenting agencies. So the subject site at 3043 6th line is located on the east side of 6th line, north of Dundas Street East in North Oakville. The roughly rectangular site measures 0.33 hectares in area, and it's located adjacent to Parsonage Pond to the east of the site and Munns United Church to the south. I'll explain a bit more of the existing and planned context in a future slide. And so the proposed development, it replaces an existing single detached dwelling on the property with a new mid-rise residential development containing a 6-story podium being 22.5 meters in height and a 12-story overall height being at 43.7 meters with just over 12,000 square meters of gross floor area and a total of 165 dwelling units. I will note that the client has been working with the region of Halton to secure up to 90 of the 165 units as both affordable and deeply affordable housing units. In terms of the programming of the site, a small surface parking area for visitors is located at the rear of the site, and 2 levels of underground parking are proposed with a total of 128 parking spaces, as well as 208 bicycle parking spaces. Vehicular access to the site is proposed via 6th line and has been sited to align with the opposite intersection at Keating Trail. And servicing areas are relegated to the rear of the site and screened by the building to minimize impact on the public realm. Indoor and outdoor amenity spaces are proposed within the development, including at-grade space, as well as to provide a transitional buffer element to the natural heritage system to the east. I'll note that a larger amenity area is also being proposed on the 7th story to take advantage of the 6-story rooftop terrace. Again, notably, the proposal includes over 60% of units as larger unit types, being at least 2 bedrooms in size. So just briefly in terms of the planning context. So within the regional official plan, the site is within a primary regional node and regional intensification corridor associated with Dundas Street, which is intended for future bus rapid transit. Within the Town of Oakville official plan, it is within the nodes and corridors and residential areas designation, and specifically within the North Oakville East secondary plan, it's within the Dundas Street urban core and neighborhood center area designations that is split essentially 50-50 on the property. I'll note that the urban core designations reflect the most urban part of the North Oakville East secondary plan area. And these areas are intended to permit the densest development and highest order activities, including a full range of residential, retail, and service commercial, entertainment, cultural, business, and institutional uses. And mixed use development is generally encouraged in this designation. I'll just note that within the specific policies for the Dundas Urban Core designation, building heights are generally a maximum of 8 stories. However, Section 7622 notes that increases up to 4 stories beyond the maximum permitted height, exclusive of bonusing, may be considered where they are adjacent to a stormwater management pond. Just in terms of the zoning, so the Town of Oakville zoning bylaw 2009-189, which applies to the site, sets out the standards for how land is to be used and developed. It includes regulations including permitted uses, scale of buildings, minimum maximum lot sizes, and parking requirements, among others. And the zoning bylaw does help implement the policies of the town's official plan. And as you can see here, the site is zoned FD, or future development, and a zoning amendment is required to bring the site into conformity with those upper tier policy documents that I just mentioned. Just briefly in terms of sustainability, so there's a number of components and features, sustainable features that the project is obviously considering through some of the detailed design considerations and future site plan applications intended for the proposal. The proposal obviously also takes into consideration some sustainability components in terms of looking at shadow impacts in terms of its public realm interface, minimal parking, EV charges, potential geothermal and green roof components within the building. And it's looking at to obviously develop this into a higher energy model building. I will also note this building is supportive of the intended transportation network along Dundas Street that I'd mentioned. Just briefly in terms of public consultation, this is actually the second owner of the property with multiple design considerations that I have been a part of in meeting with numerous public information meetings in the past on this property. And obviously we are here with this current application this evening. This includes also multiple pre-consultation meetings with Town of Oakville staff and the most recent public information meeting on May 7th of 2025. I'll note that at that meeting there was 18 participants in attendance and a number of topics that we did cover that I've just covered in this slide. I will note that there's been a number of obviously letters of concern and opposition that were submitted as part of this application. I have had a chance to review those and we will continue to consider those comments within our design and detailed discussions with town staff. So just in terms of the evolving context, there's a number of properties within obviously proximity to the site. In some cases, obviously you can see within extremely close proximity. So just to the west of the site is 3000 Sixth Line and 21 Dundas Street West. I'll note that this was approved for a series of 8 and a 9-story building, which is located on the west side of Sixth Line, just southwest of the subject site this evening. Other sites, just generally speaking on Dundas Street, in many cases are also mid-rise in context. And you can see there's a series of higher-rise towers located on the Trafalgar Road corridor, which are both approved and in some cases under construction. This concludes my presentation. We appreciate the opportunity to present the subject application, and we look forward to comments and questions from council and the public this evening. Thank you very much.
Mr. Demchik, thank you very much for your usual professional presentation. Do you have questions? Councillor Shia?
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Thank you for the presentation. So I remember the public information meeting happened last year. We got residents, and Councillor Nanda and I, we were there. So we asked a lot of questions, and the residents raised many concerns about the height. So I remember that time is 8 stories. So now, would you tell me what's the reason and what's going on? You now is applied for 12.
Thank you. To you, Mayor Burton. One of the reasons for the additional height is obviously there's obviously a market component to this, but I made the comment earlier, the original building at the time at 8 stories was intended to be a condominium project. This project is now looking at doing rental units, and in this case, a potentially significant number of affordable rental units. The client has actually worked and is structuring a partnership with the region of Halton right now. They provide for both a letter of support with the application and allocation for up to 50 deeply affordable housing units with an additional 40 units that are, I'll call it generally affordable, with the balance being market rental units. There's also the policies of the North Oakville East Secondary Plan, which were considered, and I made a comment about that policy earlier in my presentation, where on sites where in North Oakville, within that Dundas Urban Core land use designation, where the heights, as I mentioned, are permitted up to 8 stories, additional height can be considered, where you're looking at it up to 4 stories without bonusing provisions. And this location, when we looked at the shadow study impacts, and I've got a series of those which I'm happy to walk through if needed, this building at 12 stories actually performs exceptionally well in terms of shadow impacts. The nearest single detached dwelling, for example, to the northeast of the site is just over 77 meters away from the property, where in this case you have a building height of only just under 44 meters that I noted. And so the building performs very well from a height perspective, which went into some of the design considerations for the project.
Okay. I still have a question later. So yeah, so far now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nanda.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Burton. Thank you for the presentation. Just continuing on to what he was saying. Actually, can you go to your second last slide, because that was one of the questions, one of the things I wanted to bring to your attention, actually. So just looking at the recent development that was approved, where you're showing that there's going to be an 8-story building. There's actually going to be a Shoppers Drug Mart there first. And historically, what we see is a lot of these kind of retail places stay there for a very, very long time. So putting that aside, I was going to also bring to your attention that every other site that you've put here shows that it's on a regional road. So all of these are either on Dundas or Trafalgar on regional roads where they can take up higher density. Whereas your proposal is on one of our arterial roads inside of Dundas. So one of the concerns is traffic. How do you look at traffic? Because one of the concerns that came up in the meeting was, how do you expect people to make turns in and out of your building?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton. Traffic has been obviously assessed from our transportation consultant. And in that study, it obviously supported the proposed density and supported traffic movements. I do understand there's some comments that we are still awaiting for from the town, from a transportation review perspective. Depending on obviously those comments, and if there are concerns from the town, obviously the onus is on us to address those comments and concerns. And we did obviously look at, from a number of perspectives, not only traffic, but also parking. I think this came up in the public information meeting as well, where we talked about the deficiency of parking, or the concerns about deficiency of parking. I'll note that this property, albeit not, as you've noted, not specifically on Dundas, it's one property to the north within an identical land use designation, which again intends for these higher density uses to be located within. And as part of that, there's actually no minimum parking requirements. There's only maximum requirements specifically for visitor parking within that designation. It's intended obviously for those more dense buildings and dense uses to be located obviously within close proximity to Dundas to support the future intended transportation. But notwithstanding those comments, I hear the concerns about transportation and parking, and we'll continue to review that with the town.
Okay, so having the parking issues, why do we now have less parking spaces than units? You have 128 versus 165 units. So why do we have less parking now?
That's correct. And there is less parking spaces than units. Again, the 2009 North Oakville bylaw doesn't actually have any minimum standards for parking. In theory, there could be much less parking. And as I understand it, obviously, when that bylaw was drafted, it's intended to obviously function based on what the demand for potential parking is, and again, to support like future transit infrastructure. I can't speak to obviously all the other developments that are shown on the screen here. I don't know if all of those have more parking or less parking. I can only just comment on obviously the policy and planning context.
Okay. And in terms of affordable housing, you said you've had some discussions with regional. So what's the difference between moderate and deeply affordable? How do we know what is what?
That is a great question. And objectively, I will note that there's varying definitions across the Greater Toronto Area for how affordable housing is being used. But for the purposes of this meeting, I will specifically refer to the region of Halton definitions that have been provided. And so let me just pull this up. So they refer to affordable housing is housing with a market price that is affordable to low and moderate income individuals and households, spending approximately 30% of their total household income on housing without government assistance. And then assisted housing or deeply affordable housing is how I'll refer to it, is what is referred to as affordable to low and moderate income individuals and households, where a portion of the housing cost is subsidized through a government program. And in this case, the region's direct role in the housing continuum, as they refer to it, is focused on assisted housing by providing funding to create these assistive and supportive housing for low-income residents. They are generally operated in many cases by nonprofit or community housing sectors, and affordability is secured for long-term. In this case, it would be up to 25 years of grants provided by the region.
So what was your ratio between having moderate and deeply affordable housing? How many units?
So 40 units being affordable and up to 50 units being deeply affordable.
Okay. And then can you just go back to how you referenced the stormwater management? And I'm not sure if this is a question for staff as well. How you're saying that being next to a stormwater management, stormwater pond is the reason the developers decided to add more stories?
Yes, so just briefly, and I'll just cite the specific section. So it's section 7622A5 within the North Oakville East Secondary Plan, and it says increases of up to 4 stories in height beyond the maximum permitted building height, exclusive of bonusing, may be considered where adjacent to a stormwater management pond. And so that is the policy reference that was used when looking at additional height on this site.
Okay, so if our planning staff could just look into that a little bit more, if we could get more information on that. I am going to say we do still have concerns. One last question. You were also referencing having, how many meters away, having a detached home?
Approximately 77 meters to the closest detached house to the northeast of the site.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the houses across the street are townhouses, and those are still homes, and people still live in those. So whether it's detached or not, of who lives across the street and who doesn't, you know, we consider that all of our residents should be able to live in a community that they're happy with. And so there's still concerns of shadows coming onto them and concerns of traffic and, you know, higher density, over density within a neighborhood that has low rise right across the street. So if our planning staff could take note of that as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McNeice.
Thank you, through your worship. Just about the moderately affordable and deeply affordable units. So that's 50 plus 40, so 90 out of the 165 units. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So just a question to staff, and I don't expect we have the answer now, but if there could be a report back, how do we ensure that that is actually what happens and gets registered on title, as opposed to us approving it at the next meeting conceptually and something changes and they become market rate? So I'm not sure if we have an answer now, but just on the report back, if we we could understand what those assurances are that we would have on, or, before the appeal date, I'm assuming is when it comes back. That would be my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor McNeice. Mr. Demchuk, I think we've exhausted the questions for you. Thank you very much for your presentation. Madam
Thank
Clerk,
you.
would you call the registered delegations, please?
Thank you, Mayor Burton. The first registered delegation is Wagi Girgis.
Well, perhaps, Madam Clerk, you'd like to call the next one.
The next registered delegation is Pierre Sauvageau.
Mr. Sauvageau? All right. Are there any members from the public who are attending online or in person who have information that they'd like to share with council and staff? All right, in that case, I'll confine it to table, and I'll look for the motion that comments from the public with respect to the proposed official plan amendment and council and zoning bylaw amendment submitted by 3043 6th Line GP Inc. be received, and that staff consider such comments as have been provided. And that's moved by Councilor McNeice and Councilor Shea. Any objection? Madam Clerk, that's carried. That brings us 7.2. This is a public meeting and recommendation report for the town-initiated official plan amendment 76-339 and Halton Regional Official Plan Amendment 1 Employment Area Review. And we're going to hear registered delegations. We have a presentation by Sita Ganasan, our planner, to set the context. We'll hear from her first. But to relieve anybody of surprise at the end, I believe that council intends to defer this back to staff to consider the voluminous comments that we've received and to report back with a recommendation report at a later date. And with all due respect to the chances and changes of life, I would expect that would be before the end of the summer, and literally before the middle of August. Ms. Ganasan, please, you have the floor. We look forward to the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Burton and members of council. The purpose of this report is to present the recommendations for town-initiated official plan amendments to the town's employment areas. These official plan amendments are a direct response to provincial legislative changes through Bill 97, the Helping Homebuyers Protecting Tenants Act 2023, which changed the definition of area of employment in the Planning Act. The provincial changes to the Planning Act and the Provincial Planning Statement 2024 came into effect on October 20th, 2024, and represent a major shift in land use planning policy. As part of this, the province made changes to allow for employment area removal requests, which were previously called conversions, to be made at any time. Oakville has a very diverse employment base that includes a broad range of employment uses throughout its current employment areas. Under the previous, more inclusive provincial definition of area of employment, the town's employment areas all aligned with the definition and therefore were protected for employment uses. The town's employment areas are not currently aligned with the new, more exclusive provincial definition, and therefore the lands may no longer be protected for employment. The transition provision in the Planning Act also cannot currently apply, as it requires an official plan amendment for it to be implementable. This has the potential to have a big impact on economic development in the town. The 2025 Employment Areas Review Study Report showed that the number of jobs in the town is forecast to increase by approximately 74,000 by 2051. At the same time, the town is projected to have an employment land deficit of 209 hectares before 2051. Employment lands are often referred to as a finite land resource because it's not typical to see them expand. So knowing that there will be a deficit makes it imperative to preserve employment lands for employment uses and the planned function of the urban structure to be able to continue to provide space for jobs and economic growth while maintaining livability and land use compatibility. One reason to retain as much of our areas of employment as possible is that businesses in the town's key sectors require the type of space available in employment areas for their operation, such as advanced manufacturing and health and life sciences. Maintaining and growing these employment opportunities across these key sectors provides additional opportunities for residents to work locally versus commuting to surrounding areas in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. Contiguous employment areas, including areas that may be occupied by lawfully established uses, encourage clusters of businesses that can promote innovation while avoiding donut holes and compliance issues between traditional employment uses and potential sensitive land uses. When the town implements the provincial changes, the town can meet its obligation under the PPS 2024 to protect employment areas now and for the future, and council can make the final decision on the removal of lands from the employment area in line with Oakville's long-term land supply needs. Greater stability increases the certainty around the supply of employment lands. A more stable land supply means that Oakville remains competitive and attractive for investment and economic development, which means more jobs are retained and created locally. More jobs in town means more complete communities and fewer commuters, which in turn lowers our overall greenhouse gas emissions. Staff last came before council on December 8th, 2025 to present the draft official plan amendments based on the employment areas review. These recommendations we are bringing forward now stem from revisions made following extensive consultation with council, town staff, and the public. There are 3 official plan amendments, one for each of the town's official plans. The scope of these 3 OPAs was limited to employment area policies and designations in the town's official plans, those being the Livable Oakville Plan, the North Oakville East Secondary Plan, and the official plan of the Regional Municipality of Halton. The purpose of these official plan amendments is to implement those provincial changes to protect and maintain the land supply for employment uses and growth in the council-approved urban structure to 2051 and beyond, and to direct residential and employment growth to appropriate locations. The urban structure is the basis for the location of employment areas in the town and reflects a long-term land supply for housing that is planned in better locations with respect to transit and amenities. Currently, there are 5 different employment designations across the official plans that fall within the employment areas element of the urban structure. All these designations aligned with the previous definition of area of employment. These official plan amendments recommend 2 designations that are the same for both the Livable Oakville Plan and the North Oakville East Secondary Plan. The core employment designation will align with the new provincial definition of area of employment, which includes lawfully established uses, while the new diversified employment designation is for a wider range of employment uses. The specific locations of permitted uses will be provided by the zoning bylaw, so not all of the permitted uses within a designation will be allowed throughout each of the new designations. And just note that these designations were called employment area and employment generating and supporting area in the draft OPAs, which were presented at the Stat Public meeting on December 8th, 2025. And these names were changed to core employment and diversified employment. In addition to the name changes since the December statutory public meeting, revisions to the draft OPAs included a new directive policy for redesignating lands from the Parkway Belt in the event of the revocation of the Parkway Belt West Plan, strengthened land use compatibility policies through alignment with the existing D6 guidelines and the PPS 2024, and revised removal and redesignation criteria for the new employment designations to better align with the language and intent of the PPS 2024. These removal criteria for core employment and redesignation criteria for diversified employment are a direct response to the policies of the PPS 2024. As I mentioned at the beginning, one of the big changes from the province is that a request to remove lands from the employment area can now be initiated outside of a municipal comprehensive review. This means that an applicant can initiate a site-specific application to redesignate employment area lands at any time. At the same time, the PPS requires planning authorities to plan for, protect, and preserve employment lands for the long term. Therefore, the policies include robust sets of criteria for assessing these removal requests. This process is now the appropriate process for site-specific requests. In terms of schedule revisions, certain lands in North Oakville were revised to reflect public and internal comments. Lands in the northwest abutting Palermo were revised from core employment to diversified employment to address land use compatibility and existing approvals for a transit terminal, which you can see circled in black. In the northeast, 2 areas were revised following comments to adjust the redesignation of lands to core employment and diversified employment. Areas of diversified employment were added abutting Dundas Street to provide more opportunities for employment generating and supporting uses in keeping with the boundaries of the existing transitional area and to better address compatibility with residential designations to the south of Dundas. The original intent of the transitional area was to act as a buffer between the employment designation and the residential designations. The diversified employment designation works with the transitional area to fulfill that intent and provide the buffer between core employment and neighborhoods south of Burnhamthorpe. To address the projected employment land deficit, and because of the separation from sensitive land uses by the NHS, lands south of William Hulton Parkway were added to core employment. The mapping was also updated to reflect an existing institutional designation. Underpinning this work are key provincial policies and directions. The first of these is the transition provision provided by the Planning Act, which prevents lawfully established uses to continue as permitted uses in an area of employment if the use was lawfully established prior to October 20th, 2024. Planning staff's interpretation of lawfully established as the applicable zoning bylaw allows municipalities to continue to permit the full range of uses and property rights for landowners that existed prior to the change to area of employment, where a zoning bylaw was in place, thus offering an appropriate level of continued flexibility for development and redevelopment without downzoning lands retained within core employment. It also provides an opportunity to continue to provide area of employment lands that are predominantly or partially industrial in nature, but also provide for employment uses that are supportive of industry and an appropriate transition to adjacent non-employment areas to ensure land use compatibility and economic viability. Through this approach provides certainty to existing businesses and allows the town to meet requirements under the PPS to plan for, protect, and preserve employment areas in proximity to major goods movement facilities and supports the town's economic development goals. The second key provincial direction was the incorporation of the province's D6 compatibility between industrial facilities, or the D6 guidelines. These guidelines provide minimum separation distances for 3 classes of industrial facilities. The guidelines are already currently in use at the town to assess the separation and impact of industrial facilities and sensitive land uses. As per section 4.4 of the guidelines, there are different ways of measuring this separation distance. In the town, this is measured by the guidelines providing for measured from property to property line for a class 1, 2, or 3 facility from a sensitive land use. Where there is no existing industrial facility within the area designated or zoned for an industrial land use, the determination of the potential influence area is based on a hypothetical worst case scenario. The new land use compatibility policies and requirements are based on how the D6 guidelines are used and applied today, and apply to industrial uses within employment lands and to sensitive land uses within mixed-use areas where they are in proximity to each other. So the policies work both ways. On the core employment side, major facilities or class 3 facilities are restricted within 300 meters of residential land use designations. So this is for new major facilities. On the mixed-use side, to protect economic viability as per the PPS, new sensitive land uses may not be permitted within 300 meters of core employment. The may language here is key. Sensitive land uses can be still permitted within this band. They are not restricted outright, but it will depend on the intensity of the existing or future core employment uses and land use compatibility assessments that may require mitigation measures. This also helps to protect future residents of mixed-use areas from land use compatibility conflicts. When staff bring forward a comprehensive zoning bylaw amendment as the next step of this work, part of the project will be to determine if it's appropriate to zone lands within 300 meters of mixed-use areas for lighter industrial uses, so that these mixed-use areas would only need to plan for a Class 1 or 2 facility. Where there is no specific official plan policy in place when proposing an industrial facility in proximity to existing or planned sensitive land uses, the D6 guidelines would continue to apply as they do today. Furthermore, the land use compatibility assessment referred to in these policies is only a continuation of the existing policies and planning process. Section 30.19.3 of Livable Oakville lists studies that may be required as part of a complete application. These studies are already part of the planning process for industrial facilities and can be required for applications for mixed-use development, such as in the Bronte-Go MTSA. These OPAs formalize this and make the requirement consistent between the Livable Oakville Plan and the North Oakville East Secondary Plan. These new policies create additional safeguards for residents where a residential land use abuts core employment. Although the core employment designation has broad permissions for industrial uses, a new major facility that meets criteria under the new land use compatibility policies would not be permitted within 300 meters of a residential land use designation. An official plan amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment application would both be required to develop this kind of use within this band. This would follow the planning process that is currently in place, in that these applications would need to come before council for a decision. For any lighter industrial uses within this band, the D6 guidelines would still apply, and depending on the in-effect zoning, a zoning bylaw amendment application may be required. Altogether, the approach of the official plan amendments achieves the following. It upholds the urban structure and ensures the long-term provision of space for residents and jobs to 2051 and beyond. It implements the new provincial planning regime while maintaining Oakville's diverse employment base. It meets the provincial intent of the changes by removing lands from the protected area of employment. It retains all the flexibility and rights currently afforded to property owners where zoning permissions were in place prior to October 20th, 2024. It mitigates land use compatibility conflicts by defining and restricting heavier land uses. And it supports the creation of complete communities by preserving space for jobs in the town that is accessible to transportation and transit. For the past 7 years, Oakville has been listed as one of Canada's top 20 regions to invest. The approach of these OPAs will help ensure that Oakville remains a top choice, fueled by stability, strong investments, new businesses, and job creation. This work is a first step toward maintaining the integrity of Oakville's employment lands. In terms of next steps, a comprehensive zoning bylaw amendment will need to follow the adoption of these OPAs. Staff will also be developing a growth monitoring framework for the supply and utilization of the town's employment lands. The goal would be to update these data every 5 years. And finally, Bill 98, the Building Homes and Improving Transportation Infrastructure Act 2026, reached royal assent on June 2nd, 2026. So this work will be updated to align with the new streamlined official plans framework under the Planning Act and incorporated into the official plan review that is currently underway. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Councillor, are there any questions? All right. Madam Clerk, would you please call the delegations?
Thank you, Mayor Burton. The first delegation is Denise Baker.
Welcome, Ms. Baker. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you very much. And good evening to all of you. Long time no see for many of you. So I'm going to truncate what I was going to say by saying that we support the potential deferral that you mentioned at the outset of this, Mr. Mayor. We think that is appropriate in order to deal with a number of our outstanding issues. But before I do that, I just want to touch on just a couple of things very, very briefly, because we believe that the deferral would give us an opportunity to discuss some key issues. The first being the purpose of the core employment designation. The second being planning staff's interpretation of lawfully established. And then the third being what we see as a fundamental policy gap that is in both official plans in terms of the location of some core employment designated lands directly abutting or adjacent to existing residential areas. As I always like to say, the best stories are always told at the beginning, so I'm just going to ask for a little bit of indulgence to talk about why these changes to employment area protections occurred. And to do that, I'm going to use the overhead projector. I'm going old school with the overhead to talk about when Bill 97, when the decision was issued on Bill 97. And I'm wondering if we could operate the overhead.
Directly. Just be patient.
Thank you, I will. And so you'll see this is the environmental, the ERO posting from the Environmental Registry when the province made its decision on Bill 97 back in June 16th, 2023. And I'm not sure why it's shaking, but just bear with me. And I think of note, what is the most important thing to note here is the provision that talks about the changes to the employment area protections. And the purpose of the changes to employment area protections was to modify the definition of area of employment to only include heavy industry and other employment uses that cannot be located near sensitive land uses, i.e. not suitable for mixed use, to scope the applicability of existing provisions which limit appeals of municipal refusals and non-decisions. So that's the purpose behind this, to only include heavy industry and other employment uses that can't be located near sensitive land uses. And the staff report has translated the employment area definition to the core employment in the official plan amendments that are before you, which means that you read this as saying those in core employment designations are to only include heavy industry and other employment uses that cannot be located near sensitive land uses. That is not what these official plan amendments do. And so we would like an opportunity to speak to staff about that premise as to why those official plan amendments do not do what the province intended. Also briefly, we'd like an opportunity to speak to staff on their interpretation of lawfully established, which I submit to all of you, doesn't accord to the basic rules of statutory interpretation. And of course, as everybody knows, the basic rules of statutory interpretation is that you have to read the act not only as it is intended, but with the plain words that are on the page. And one of my challenges with staff's interpretation of the lawfully established is the fact that it ignores this concept of continuation of a use. And staff has taken the position, you can see this is directly from the Planning Act, as you can see the last page, section 1, sub 1.1. In order for it to be an area of employment, it includes parcels of land that are subject to official plan policies authorizing the continuation of a use. It doesn't authorize the continuation of a permission for a use, as set out in the zoning bylaw. It authorizes the continuation of the use. And the purpose of this was to protect those uses that exist. But what staff has done is are purporting to protect uses or include uses in the core employment that don't exist, but that might exist or could exist perhaps one day, but that don't currently exist. And I submit to you that is going to create a big policy gap for you, because I don't actually think you have any protected core employment areas under the definition in the PPS and under the Planning Act. And I think that that has resulted in a large policy gap that creates very unintended consequences for the unintended consequences in the official plan amendments that are before you. And so it's for those reasons, and I'll keep it brief there, that I think that there needs to be a fulsome discussion with staff on those key points and on the points of where these heavy industrial uses are supposed to go and why in many locations in the town they're proposed to go directly abutting or adjacent to existing residential uses.
Well, Ms. Baker, could you, for the benefit of the public and those of us who are maybe not lawyers or planners, tease out a little bit of meaning for this phrase, policy gap, and help us understand what that means?
Thank you, sir, and through you to the rest of council. I think the policy gap exists that in the event that the core employment area, in fact, is not considered an area of employment under the Planning Act, you've actually left a hole in your policies in terms of the conversion of those lands, because the conversion policies under the PPS only apply if you're an employment area. And I submit to you, by allowing uses that are outside of the definition of an employment area, those conversion policies don't apply. And you're making yourself actually susceptible to conversions. And that, is, in fact, has happened before the tribunal in a case out in Hamilton, where they didn't meet the definition and the lands, in fact, were converted.
So, in fact, you're suggesting that we will have failed in our purpose of protecting employment lands by not being as careful as we should have been about what we consider an employment use to be permitted?
Certainly, if that is the objective, then I always hesitate to say failed, but because there's always an opportunity to improve it before you failed. But if you pass it as it is, I don't believe you'll have achieved your objective.
Thank you for the euphemism. I'll use that from now on. Councillor Duddick has a question for you.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. Not a question, but thank you. Thank you for coming out tonight and expressing your concerns. Am I correct in assuming that your comments were that you would be very pleased to meet with staff to address some of the issues you brought to light this evening?
Thank you, Councillor Duddick, and through you, Your Worship, absolutely. We'd be very pleased to meet with staff. One of the things I note, I've read all the comments that were submitted, all 200 pages of them, and what I do note is that you have some of the best land use planners in the province involved in this file, and including many of whom are your own staff. And I think I will tell you, there's a better way, and there's a better way that will achieve your objectives that represent good planning. And I think that's the key starting point. It has to represent good planning as opposed to either trying to avoid statutory rights of appeal or anything like that. Our starting point should be good planning, and you have the right people at the table to do that.
Always nice to have you here versus somewhere else later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duddick. Councillor Hazletteel.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Burton. Nice to see you tonight, and thank you for your time early this morning, and for clarifying some of the opportunities before we fail in what's been written. So the refer back tonight is does reflect some of that conversation and the opportunities that you've identified. And I'm not sure about the timing. The mayor has indicated some timing, but please, if you can, make yourself available. I think you'll be very helpful in us getting to the next step.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship, we'll absolutely make ourselves available to make. We're aware of the timelines, and we'll make ourselves available, certainly.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Baker, very much. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
Next delegation is Ruth Victor.
Welcome, Ms. Victor. We look forward to your information.
Thank you. My name is Ruth Victor. I'm the land use planner for Knockby. There is a submission before you tonight from Lupster Nixon on behalf of Knockby. All of the members of Knockby are set out within Schedule A to that letter, and equally a number of the members of Knockby have provided separate submissions to you outlining their concerns as they relate to their specific parcels of land. Ms. Baker did an outstanding job doing a highlight overview of what the issues are. I'm just going to focus in on one very specific issue that is outlined within the submissions that have been provided by NOCB. There is one specific policy proposed, Section 76824, which states, the following policies apply to lands 300 meters outside of lands designated core employment. To protect the operational and economic viability of existing and future major facilities, notwithstanding the permitted uses, new sensitive land uses may not be permitted within mixed-use designations. What we're talking about as being the primary issues that we're looking at is the municipality. We support the fundamental objective of employment within the town and meeting your job targets. We support the creation of housing and residential opportunities here. The municipality, through this OPA, through staff and what's come forward today, is proposing core employment designation immediately adjacent to the Niagawa Urban Core, immediately adjacent to the Trafalgar Urban Core, and immediately adjacent to the transition area designation. As you can see from that policy, where that designation immediately abuts those designations which would otherwise permit residential uses, those residential uses will not be allowed within 300 meters of that designation boundary. In essence, it's a removal of the current permissions, such as in the Trafalgar Urban Core, where applications recently have been approved for residential land uses. Other applications in process proposing mixed land uses, also residential land uses within that proximate area. We're creating a fundamental conflict between the overall objectives for those mixed-use designations and the proposed core employment land use. Because of that, we have, throughout the whole planning process, coming to these OPAs before you, have been actively engaged with staff, continue to offer to be engaged with staff if this matter is referred back to them. This is a very significant, important issue for the members of NOCB, and we do believe that there is a resolution. We believe that there is a very good path forward, as one might say, that does represent good planning, that meets all of our needs, and will come up with the best way for all of us to work together as we move forward. Thank you.
Ms. Victor, thank you. I just want to add that on behalf of council that it's important to us too, the urban growth centers and the growth corridors are where the prime directive of the Livable Oakville Plan directs growth and intensification in order to achieve our primary goal, which is to conserve the character of our stable, established neighborhood streets. To the extent that we reduce the capacity of our urban, our growth corridors and our growth nodes, we hasten the day when we can no longer hold that line. And so I believe you're going to find that all of us share, and I believe staff do as well, the urgency of the need to come to a solution to the problem.
Thank you.
Council, any other questions or comments? Thank you, Ms. Victor.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
Next delegation is Jason Sheldon.
Welcome, Mr. Sheldon. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Good evening. My name is Jason Sheldon. I'm with the Remington Group. We are members of NOCB. We have lands within the residential designation. We have lands within the transition area designation, and we also have lands within the employment designation. I'm here tonight to support Ms. Baker and Ms. Victor's submissions. My comments will be brief because I also support the potential for a deferral and working with you and town staff to find the resolutions. But I did want to just mention that I do recognize that the diversified employment area designation was introduced on certain lands. I do believe there's an opportunity to expand that designation to address the comments that were made by Ms. Baker and Ms. Victor. And I do believe that by introducing that diversified employment land area, we can provide the appropriate transition from the sensitive residential uses through to the core employment uses. We can maintain existing permissions to build the residential and mixed-use residential within the transition area lands, which are the lands I'm talking about tonight for us. We can provide the opportunity to deliver a full range of employment uses and jobs, including health sciences, professional offices, digital media as examples, all of which would not be permitted in the core employment designation. We can minimize the need for land use compatibility studies to determine where land use should occur. These studies are complicated, costly, and very time-consuming. And this would overall support complete communities. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your information. Council, any questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk?
The next delegation is Tony DeFranco.
Mr. DeFranco, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, members of council and members of the community. My name is Tony DeFranco, and I'm a planner with Sejeki Planning. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the property owner of the site at 2515 Wycroft Road, and I've just got one image to share as a backdrop to my remarks. I should say that this, my remarks tonight build on the written letter which I previously provided, and understanding the desire to defer this, which we do support, I'll keep my remarks fairly truncated. So this is the site here that my client owns. It's at the northeast corner of Bronte Road and Wycroft. And when we look at the site today, it is very clearly not an employment site. The existing uses on the site are 2 hotel buildings, as well as the Oakville Conference Center and Banquet Hall facility. And so when we go back to first principles around Bill 97 and the changes to the Planning Act in terms of the definition of employment areas, we very, very clearly see that these kinds of uses related to hotels and hospitality do not meet the definition of employment uses under the Planning Act. And so that is our starting point, and that is where some of our concerns emerge from. And I think there's 2 real concerns here. One is that the core employment designation will prevent my client's ability to infill the site with additional kinds of commercial, retail, service uses, and a full range of commercial uses that support the viability of the hotel and the conference center. You can see there's already a cluster of commercial uses forming on the site today, and so the primary interest is to protect for the ability to introduce a broader mix of commercial uses on the site, and we worry that the designation to core employment will not enable that. So that's the first concern. And then the second one is related to what I would call an inconsistent treatment of hotel properties across the town. We've done a little bit of analysis and can see that all of the other hotel properties within employment areas in the town are in fact proposed to be redesignated to diversified employment. And so this site here, as well as the hotel directly to the west of Bronte Road, are the only outliers. And we do find that really intriguing and something we'd like to unpack with staff a bit further. And then finally, the third concern we want to raise is what's been highlighted tonight is with regards to the interpretation of lawfully existing. I too agree that lawfully existing typically means that the building or the use exists on the site at a certain date. And so we worry that staff's interpretation may be challenged, and in the fullness of time, we may not be able to develop the kinds of uses that are permitted under the bylaw today through the lawfully established provisions. So I think those are it's the essence of my client's concerns. We certainly have been working with staff over the past several months through this study, and we're very eager to continue those discussions. So we would welcome the deferral and hope to be able to unpack some of the concerns we have through further discussions with staff.
Thank you very much, Mr. DeFranco. Council, any questions? Thank you, sir. Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mayor Burton. The next delegation is Raj Kehar.
Welcome, sir. We look forward to your information.
Thank you, Mayor Burton, and good evening, members of council. My name is Raj Kehar. As you've noted, I'm a lawyer at Weir Folds, and I'm here specifically with respect to one of our clients, Postscriptum Holdings, Inc. They're the owners of land at 874 Sinclair Avenue, and it's going to come as no surprise to any of you that I support Ms. Baker's submissions and the general proposition and the deferral. But what I'm also asking for is for us to be able to work with staff specifically about the Postscriptum property. It's been identified as core employment in the proposed OPA. It should be diversified employment. And there's a really good reason for that. Now, that site, it is sandwiched between an automotive dealership to the east and retail building to the west. It is an area that is largely at 874 Sinclair and all of its surrounding, an area of automotive uses. Those use permissions are built into the zoning bylaw, but for our client's site, it's the site that used to be the old TDL Wendy's headquarters. That site didn't have that in its zoning. And it didn't have it because it got a site-specific zoning permission for the site. So our clients had a lot of challenge trying to get a viable use in that space since TDL left. And we approached the town some time ago and asked to get the automotive use in because there's been a lot of interest to have an automotive dealership in that building. We went through a minor variance application. We filed for it to get the use. There was some resistance initially with town staff. Ultimately, we settled with the town. We went to the Ontario Land Tribunal. We executed minutes of settlement with the town to have that use there. Just this past Friday, the Ontario Land Tribunal authorized the use. So now I have the automotive use on that site. But what's my problem? The moment this core employment designation gets put forth on this parcel, it gets taken away. And if it gets taken away, what am I left with? My client no longer has the automotive use, and then they're left bringing in a true core employment use in an area that is sandwiched with an automotive dealership, retail on the west side, and frankly, some restaurants that are south of it. That to me doesn't make any sense, and I think what the appropriate approach here is the deferral that my client is supporting.
Thank you very much for your remarks.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Thank you. The next delegation is Eldon Theodore, who's with us virtually.
I see him online. Welcome, Mr. Theodore. It's good to see your smiling face. We look forward to your information.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. And thank you for loading my presentation. First and foremost, I want to thank staff for responding to our concerns with respect to my client, TLMPT Ontario Limited, for their lands in North Oakville. We appreciate the application of the diversified employment designation as a buffer between the future core employment lands to the north and the residential and sensitive land uses to the south and west, respectively. There are two concerns I wanted to bring to staff's attention. I do support the deferral that's been mentioned tonight. The first concern, as you can see on this first page here, as the diversified employment has been applied, the northern limit of that designation does not align with the rear yard of the property located central to my client's lands. And that's what that does is, without that alignment, the boundary would result in a staggering of that boundary across two different properties. That really serves as an obstacle to seamless development between what we understand as core employment and what will be diversified employment uses. So if you go to the next page, what we're simply asking is that the boundary be adjusted slightly north, as shown on this page here, to simply create that continuity between rear yard and on my client's land. The second point I wanted to raise was just a concern with respect to, within the diversified employment designation, the proposed 2,500 square meter restriction on retail and service commercial uses. Concerned because it would be the first numerical restriction of its kind for these type of uses in North Oakville. And it's not clear where the number is based on and whether the size of the diversified employment designation was considered when recommending it. And the restriction is expressed in the policy as both a maximum requirement and an approximate, creating confusion. The policy reads as retail and service commercial uses on sites designated diversified employment shall not exceed a maximum of approximately 2,500 square meters. So this creates confusion in terms of how this is going to be applied and implemented. So our opinion, this restriction for these type of uses should occur at the implementing zoning stage. We would ask that staff modify the language to meet that objective. We're obviously happy to meet to discuss our concerns. We provided recommended language as part of our submission to council this evening. I want to thank staff for the efforts and the modifications we've seen to date, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Theodore. Council, any questions? Madam Clerk, the next delegation, please.
The next delegation is Paul Sandu, and he's also with us virtually.
Mr. Sandu.
Good evening, Mayor Burden.
I hear you.
Council.
And I see your logo. Welcome. We look forward to your submission.
Sorry, can you hear me, sir? Hello?
Actually, many people nodded yes, but I would tell you that you're a little bit faint, and if you could speak more forcefully or closer to your microphone, it'll assist everybody, including the public, to hear you.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor Burton, members of council, and town staff. My name is Paul Sandu. I am the son of Kamalji Tony Sandu, the owner of 3445 Dundas Street West, formerly known as Burton Stables. My father is attending the meeting virtually this evening, but is not feeling well. The town has kindly permitted me to present his comments on his behalf. My father has authorized me to speak for him this evening. The following remarks represent my father's comments and concerns regarding his property. Thank you. My name is Kamalji Tony Sandu, and I am the owner of 3445 Dundas Street West, formerly known as Burton Stable. I am not a planner, developer, or lawyer. I am simply a longtime Oakville property owner who is trying to understand the future vision for my property. For many years since 2009, I have understood that the planning vision for the North Oakville, including the North Oakville West Secondary Plan, was to encourage employment generating development and economic growth. I supported that vision and believed my property would eventually participate in that growth. The lands immediately east of my property, comprising approximately 60 acres, are owned by Quadreal Development. Quadreal initiated its draft plan of subdivision application in 2011. Since then, I have attended all the landowner meetings and supported Quadreal's draft plan of subdivision. I personally submitted a written submission and spoke before council in support of that application as a delegate at June 12, 2023 council meeting. Quadreal's application was ultimately approved. I supported the broader planning vision for the North Oakville West Secondary Plan area, including the road network and infrastructure improvement, and provided written support for the construction of Avenue 2, which will run along the easterly boundary of my property. I supported Quadreal's application because I believed my property would participate in the broader planning vision being established for the surrounding land. My 64 acres fronts onto Dundas Street West as an existing grandfathered Dundas Street entrance and occupies what I believe is an important gateway location to Oakville's future employment areas. Over the past several months, I have spent considerable time reviewing OPA 34, the Livable Oakville Official Plan, the Employment Areas Review materials, and the recent provincial policy changes affecting employment lands. I have also met directly with town planning staff to better understand the planning framework affecting my property. Despite these efforts, I remain uncertain as to what forms of development are realistically envisioned and encouraged for 3445 Dundas Street West. Most recently, I explored the possibility of bringing the Humane Society of Oakville, Milton, and Halton to the property. Through discussions with town staff, I learned that such a use would no longer be supported under the emerging policy framework and would require a rezoning application. This experience made me realize that I still do not know what types of development are actually for my property. I understand that planning policies change and that the town must implement provincial requirements. My purpose tonight is not to challenge staff or advocate for any specific project or use. My concern is that after years of supporting the planning vision for this area, reviewing the policies, and meeting with staff, I still do not clearly understand what the town ultimately wants this property to become. I am not a professional planner with knowledge of all the technical and planning details. My submission simply sets out how I have been affected by changes to land use planning policies, and I respectfully seek clarification. I respectfully request that staff and council provide clear guidance regarding the types of uses and development opportunities that are intended to be encouraged on my property under the current and proposed planning framework, taking into consideration the property's unique location, frontage on Dundas Street West, existing access, proximity to Avenue 2, and its position immediately beside the approved quadrille development. In my view, the property represents an important gateway to Oakville's future employment land, and I would simply like to understand the long-term vision for this property so that I can responsibly plan for its future. Thank you very much for your time, consideration, and service to our community.
Thank you, sir. And Councillor Dudek has a question for you.
Thank you, through your worship. Mr. Sandhu, out of interest, when I served on the Oakville Heritage Committee, is it your father who owned that property that used to have the Burton stables and the house located on it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so what is the current designation on that property?
I apologize, ma'am. My father was actually not feeling well. I don't have authorization to answer that question. I don't have the information in front of me here.
Okay, thank you. I can understand your problems. I'll check up with staff then. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dudek. Councillor Elgar and then Councillor Nanda.
Thank you. Through Mayor Burton, I think Mr. Tim Lee was kind enough today to actually get in touch with Mr. Sandhu. And I wonder if staff could just explain the meeting tonight is an official plan amendment. And Mr. Sandhu is just looking for zoning and what the zoning is. Just, people don't understand. He is not a planner. He's not a lawyer, but he's just a person that's got the property where the house burned down a number of years ago on the Burton stables. But can staff just give him a quick answer tonight? And I'd like to thank Tim Lee, who did contact him today.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll turn to staff now.
Through you, Mayor Burton. So the lands in question are currently zoned FD, future development, and the designation is currently business employment.
So I think what he was wondering, if the church was to go there, he could apply for that if he wanted to, correct?
Through the mayor, so any application would have to have a zoning bylaw amendment application because there is currently no permitted uses with the future development zone. So to get a permitted use on the property, you would need to submit a zoning bylaw amendment application.
Correct. I think that's where the confusion has come for the last few years. So I think it's getting clarification today. And I know Mr. Tony Sandhu, who's not well, but the son, do you have any other questions that you need tonight, or can you work with staff?
That'll be all for now, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. Thank you, everybody. Councillor McNeice.
Thank you, through your worship. I just wondered to the delegate if it's worth mentioning the ability to have a pre-consultation if they wanted some more information through the town, maybe of benefit to them.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Elgar, anything else? Thank you, Councillor Elgar. Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mayor Burton. The next delegation is Peter Smith, and he is with us virtually.
All right.
Apologies, just turning on my audio and video.
Thank you for turning those on. We hear you, and I'm looking for you. I've found you now. So please begin. We look forward to your information.
Terrific. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. My name is Peter Smith. I'm a planner and a partner at Bousfields, and we're the planners for the owners of 2175 Cornwall Road. On their behalf, I addressed Planning and Development Council at the last meeting, and we've written 2 previous submissions plus a current submission that is in front of you this evening. So because of all of that, I'll be brief. In essence, our opinion is just simply this, that the subject lands should be designated diversified employment rather than core employment. And there's 4 reasons, which I'll go through very quickly. First of all, its location fronting on Cornwall, which is identified as a major intensification corridor. Secondly, the uses to the east and west along Cornwall, which are predominantly retail and service commercial and not industrial and manufacturing. Thirdly, the existing permitted uses in the business employment official plan designation and zoning that applies to the site, which are essentially aligned with the uses that are proposed in the diversified employment designation. And then fourthly and finally, the transitional location of the property between, acting as a buffer between the Ford plant to the north and to the residential community to the south. And in my opinion, the diversified employment designation would be more compatible than a core employment area designation. And in fact, that transitional function, that idea of acting as a buffer, is precisely the function that staff have identified for the diversified employment designation. And so fundamentally, this exercise, at least in terms of applying a core employment designation or a diversified employment designation, is fundamentally about land use planning, applying and finding the right land use designation for the right lands. And in this case, these are lands that today are designated business employment and zoned business employment that provides for that type of transitional function relative to the residential community on the south side of Cornwall. And so while there's been discussion in terms of our previous submissions that the right forum to decide on the designation for these lands is through a future site-specific application, I respectfully disagree. This is the time where the appropriate designation should be determined, and even the decision by staff to recommend a core employment designation rather than a diversified employment designation, given the current business employment designation, is a very specific, site-specific change, which in my opinion is a change in the wrong direction away from the transitional function that the current designation allows and the future designation should allow. So in conclusion, I as well support the idea of deferring this and sending it back to staff, and I'd look forward to an opportunity to have some serious dialogue with staff about the appropriate designation for this property through that process. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. We appreciate your thoughts, and I'm looking for comments or questions, but I believe I can just thank you, and we'll move on from here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Council, I'd now like the clerk to poll the audience to see if there's anybody else.
Yep, we have one more delegation, Stephanie Quast, who's with us virtually.
Ms. Guast, there you are. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Burton and members of council. I am Stephanie Quast, a planner and a partner with Bousfields. We have submitted letters and make these comments tonight on behalf of the registered owner, Andreen Joshua Creek Limited, of a property located at 1359 Burnhamthorpe Road East. This property is located in the northeast quadrant of North Oakville, west of 9th Line and north of Burnhamthorpe Road, with William Halton Parkway bisecting the southerly portion of our property. Like many you've heard tonight, we have been actively participating in this EAR process. Upon review of the OPAs tonight, we firstly want to thank staff for redesignating a small portion of our site to the diversified employment designation. The concern, however, is that the portion of our site where staff have shown the diversified employment designation, which is south of William Halton Parkway, is actually the area intended to be the location of our stormwater management pond, the details of which have been refined over the last 2 years and submitted to staff in May 2025 through a formal environmental and servicing report. So our request is that the diversified employment designation be relocated just to the north side of William Halton Parkway in recognition of this important swim infrastructure that is planned for the south side of William Halton Parkway. Through our discussions with staff, we have provided concept plans showing how the balance of the site can and will redevelop with core employment uses, ultimately generating a significant amount of core employment gross floor area for the town. We intend to file a site-specific development application to accommodate this plan and to accompany our submitted environmental and servicing report. However, since this EAR study deals with land uses, we believe these OPAs before you tonight are the appropriate vehicle to establish the land use context for the site, thereby allowing our future site-specific development application to iron out the details. In this regard, and in closing, we are respectfully requesting that the portion of our site located on the north side of William Halton be designated diversified employment instead of the south side. To be clear, we are not asking for more diversified employment land. We are simply seeking a switch from the south side of the road to the north. Thank you for your consideration and your time. We support the deferral of this item to allow continued discussions with staff in hopes of finding resolution to this matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Quast. Council? Very well, Ms. Quast, we appreciate your information. Madam Clerk?
Next delegation is Elizabeth Chalmers.
Ms. Chalmers, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Chalmers, President of the Joshua Creek Residents Association, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight on the proposed OPA changes and the new employment land designation definitions. I want to focus, or speak, I guess, to the JCRA focus on protecting our residents from incompatible land uses. When we look at the designations that have been proposed, it certainly seems initially that core employment provides a greater level of control to the town with respect to determining what goes on those lands. Not being appealable to OLT makes a difference and means that the council and the town are not subject to the decisions of OLT on every instance. We do have some concerns from reading through the report that core designation may result in what we would call upzoning from the existing E2 uses on lands that are in the Joshua Creek Residents Association neighborhood. As you know, we are bounded by Cornwall Road with E2 designations and Winston Churchill Boulevard with E2 designations. So we do have some concern about it. When we look at the diversified designation, though, it certainly seems there's no constraints on what could come on the land if it received a diversified designation. And so we welcome the deferral as a way to look at clarity on what the uses are on those lands now and in the future, whether it's diversified or whether it's core. We're very appreciative of all the time that has gone into this by planning staff, and also the time they gave to JCRA answering a series of questions that we put forward on the designations. And we certainly appreciate the additional protections that are in place for residents or for sensitive land uses with respect to class 3 facilities and the 300-meter distance. We appreciate that there's a definition for logistics centers now, and that would make a difference. We would strongly suggest that warehouses not be considered lighter industrial facilities. When you are looking at a warehouse of 650,000 square feet with 125 truck bays that can operate 24/7, 365 days a year, it's not lighter from a resident's perspective. So I don't know if there's a way to be dealing with that throughout this review. And I think earlier the planner mentioned, intensity on the land. How are we defining intensity of use? That's a question that I think we discussed in previous delegations. So I do just want to raise that. And we look forward to participating in any way that we can throughout the process while we get to a new, definitions. And thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. Chalmers, for taking the time to share those thoughts with us tonight.
Thank you.
All right, Council, you've had the draft referral motion referred to you earlier this evening. I'm going to recognize Councillor Haslett-Thiel then, as I think you'd like to move it.
Yes, I'd like to move it and just make a couple comments if I could.
Comment away. Let's get a seconder first. Councillor Giddings, thank you.
So I want to also thank staff for some extensive work in answering numerous questions and trying to help us through this. I'm pleased that you've drafted the referral motion tonight. And would you like me to read it into the record, Mayor Burton, or should I?
It goes into the record just by being adopted.
Okay, so, and is it up on the screen? Can it be put up on the screen for the public to see it? So while they're doing that, I think that tonight what we've heard is an opportunity for clarification, underlying policies and practices that may benefit us as a town as we try to protect our employment lands, but also work in partnership with all the stakeholders. In item 2 of the referral, it talks about the different approaches that staff will be taking over the next while, and I'm comfortable that while it may not explicitly say engage and bring in all the experts that have brought forward their concerns, I'm assured that that will occur. And I think it's also important that it references varying context across employment areas. Specifically in Ward 3, the concerns around the area along Cornwall into Barrel, along Ford. So I appreciate that language. And I also appreciate that we've heard tonight that core designations in some areas may or may not be appropriate, and we need clarity on some of that, I'll say, disagreement of the interpretations that have been made. So I'm pleased to move referring this back. I'm appreciative at the last-minute efforts to draft this for us, and I hope my council colleagues, after hearing folks tonight, will concur that the right approach is to move this back and come back with a lot more clarity for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Giddings? Councillor Giddings is good. Anyone else? I know that these concerns are alive in several other wards as well. Any other speakers? Then I'll ask if there's any objection to the motion. Madam Clerk, there's no objection, the motion carries. Council, would you like a brief break before we consider item 8.1, the recommendation report? How about we come back in 10 minutes? I'll call that 8:15. We're in recess.
Recording stopped.
All right, council, we're back in order. And our first and last item before us, main item before us is item 8.1, the recommendation report from the zoning review for low-density residential land south of Dundas Street, subject to zoning bylaw 2014. And I'd like to call on Catherine Buckerfield, our senior planner, to provide a presentation. We have no delegations. Ms. Buckerfield, we are all yours.
Thank you, Mayor Burton and members of council and members of the public tuning into tonight's meeting. This presentation is in relation to item 8.1 of tonight's agenda, which is the recommendation for town-initiated zoning bylaw amendments to zoning bylaw 2014-014. This evening, I'll take us through the recommendation, context for the low-density residential study, key matters of interest, and then remind us of our recommendation at the end. Tonight, I am pleased to recommend town-initiated amendments to zoning bylaw 2014 through bylaw 2026-088. For context, zoning bylaw 2014-014 applies generally to lands south of Dundas Street and north of Highway 407. Going forward, I'll be referring to zoning bylaw 2014-014 as just the zoning bylaw. The focus of this review is further refined to the residential low zones where detached and semi-detached houses are permitted. You can see these areas depicted in yellow on the map shown on the screen. The main goal of this review has been to clarify and simplify zoning regulations to make them easier to understand and apply, reduce the number of residential low zones, and apply more equitable practices and improve livability. Through the review that we underwent a public survey in 2023 to get initial feedback from the public. We worked with Nethery Planning, who helped host public open houses in spring of 2025. Nethery Planning prepared a background report and provided draft recommendations, which were presented at the statutory public meeting on April 20th, 2026. And we are now pleased to be at the point of recommending amendments to the zoning bylaw. Through this review, various updates are being recommended to improve the zoning bylaw, make it easier to use, and improve the communities of Oakville. Key updates which are discussed in more detail at the statutory public meeting include general amendments for clarity, such as the introduction of table identifiers and reorganization of information, clarification of definitions and regulations, proposed updates to transition provisions, streamlining and consolidation of zones and symbol changes from RL to R for ease of transition. This includes related updates to the mapping. We've got updates to requirements for side yards, window wells, lot coverage, garage area, and residential floor area. Introduction of height requirements based on roof slope. Also introduction of items such as driveway setbacks, soft landscaping requirements, and minimum yards for additional residential units, and updates to special provisions for heritage conservation districts, which include the provision for the Trafalgar Road Heritage Conservation District, and overall updates to special provisions to align with the recommended changes to the zoning bylaw. At the statutory public meeting, matters of interest were mentioned that staff have explored and provided more information on through the staff report attached under item 8.1. At the statutory public meeting, various questions about residential soft landscaping came up. Minimum soft landscaping strips and percentages are recommended to be introduced into the zoning bylaw. Staff is of the opinion that regulating residential soft landscaping is appropriate and will benefit the community and result in the reduction of negative impacts on adjacent homeowners through improved stormwater management. On the screen is a diagram that demonstrates that even on our smallest lots in the town, a walkway along the side of the house is possible and development will still be functional. Earlier today, a resident expressed concerns with some proposed changes to the zoning bylaw. In light of this communication, I thought I could provide further clarity regarding proposed changes. The resident expressed concern with including private garages in the calculation of residential floor area. Currently, garages are regulated through a maximum garage floor area, and we regularly see variances requesting to allow for flexibility for tandem parking or for additional storage. By adding what is currently permitted for garage area to the total residential floor area, residents will have more flexibility in how they design their home. They can be in control of whether they prioritize space in their garage or in their home. They can also convert portions of an existing garage into livable space without requiring relief from the zoning bylaw. Garages will now be regulated based on the width at the opening to ensure that a garage does not dominate the front of the home rather than regulating the overall size. And parking can still be provided within the garage or on the driveway. The resident also expressed concerns with the proposed approach to side yards and lot coverage. Staff are of the opinion that a more equitable approach is being taken by tying requirements to the size of the lot rather than simply the zone label. It is a more tailored approach to the lots. Through public consultation, side yards were identified as insufficient, with drainage and tree preservation cited as significant concerns. Increasing setbacks and tying to lot frontage will alleviate flooding issues and improve tree retention and allow for residential soft landscaping. Lot coverage is also proposed to be tied to lot size. This results in a home that is appropriate for the size of the lot and maintains a balance between built form and open space. This approach will result in more consistency across neighborhoods when there's a variation in lotting fabric. In addition to the updated approach to lot coverage, we are proposing a 10 square meter exemption for accessory buildings so everyone can have a shed on their property without requiring additional relief to the zoning bylaw, furthering the goal of flexibility for residents. Throughout the course of this review of the zoning bylaw, various bills have been passed, including the most recent, which received royal assent on June 2nd, 2026, which is Bill 98, Building Homes and Improving Transportation Infrastructure Act, which includes changes to the Planning Act. These changes reference limiting the ability of zoning bylaws to require the minimum area of a parcel of urban residential land to be greater than the prescribed area or to require a minimum lot frontage or minimum depth of a parcel greater than the prescribed area. Currently, there are no regulations prescribing a specific threshold. Staff has considered the implications of Bill 98. However, the province has not indicated a timeline for sharing any maximum requirements related to lot area, frontage, and depth. Without any confirmation of a date or whether changes will happen, town staff recommend proceeding with the town-initiated amendments proposed to the zoning bylaw through bylaw 2026-088. Staff will respond once changes are brought forward by the province. I'd like to highlight that the proposed refinements modernize Oakville's residential zoning for clarity, flexibility, and environmental performance. The framework promotes clearer interpretation and streamlined application of zoning standards. Collectively, these changes position zoning as a responsive, forward-looking tool aligned with the goals of the Livable Oakville Plan. Most importantly, the proposed amendments are consistent with the Provincial Planning Statement 2024 and conform to the Halton Region Official Plan and the Livable Oakville Official Plan. I'd like to close by turning us back to the recommendation that the recommended town-initiated zoning amendments to zoning bylaw 2014-014 as amended be adopted, that the bylaw 2026-088 be passed, and the notice of council's decision reflects that council has considered all written and oral submissions relating to this matter and that those comments have been appropriately addressed. I am now here joined by Joe Nethery of Nethery Planning to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. The chair is going to recognize Councillor Knoll for the motion to approve.
I'm happy to give you the motion, but I did see Councillor Mears' hand. Okay.
I know.
Okay. I'll give you the motion to approve.
Thank you. And Councillor Grant for the second. And Councillor O'Meara for your questions.
Thank you very much. And I know at the public meeting, I'd raised the issue of sort of where we measure grades from. And in some site plans we had, grades had to slope forward and it created a big one. Can you maybe just go over sort of what those changes look like or how we've addressed that concern that was brought up last time?
Through you, Mayor Burton, thank you for that question, Councillor O'Meara. In our staff report on page 10, we do outline and discuss the measurement of height from established grade. At this time, height is currently being measured from established grade, which is the center point of the front lot line for interior lots, and the average of the center points of each lot line abutting a road for corner lots, through corner lots, and interior lots having more than one separate front lot line. It's a little bit of a mouthful on that second piece, but really it's at the center point of the front lot line, and it's an important point because that's in a point that is in the municipality's control. We know that we can measure from it. It won't be manipulated. Other municipalities will sometimes take a look at measurements around the interior close to the house, which can be manipulated or changed over time, or they can be quite complex to measure. And at this point, staff are recommending to continue the use of the established grade. It is a clear measure. It's usable for the building community and for staff and for residents. And the conditions that you had referenced with concern around elevated roadways and things like that really could be dealt with when a new subdivision comes in. We can take a closer look at those conditions and address it through these comprehensive zoning reviews. So at this time, if anyone has any further questions, that's the approach that we're continuing to take.
Thank you, Ms. Buckerfield. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship. With respect to established grades, who determines where the point of grade is before for an application?
Through you, Mayor Burton, it's a defined point. So it's the center point of the front lot line. And it's defined through a surveyor. So a surveyor will go out and confirm that. And so I think maybe that's what you're getting at. So it's a very technical location and confirmed going forward. And I'm not sure if anyone else has anything else to add, but at this point, it's a confirmed point that is universal for everyone, and everyone will know how to find it quite easily.
And that'll be through their application process when they're putting in for an infill. The point of grade where they will do that and they will hire the surveys to do that?
Through you, Mayor Burton, that's correct. So when someone comes in for a building permit, their survey will identify established grade, and the same for any other type of planning application such as a minor variance. Established grade will be determined and then height will be measured from that point.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Anyone else? Councillor Hazard-Thiel.
Thank you, and I apologize for not asking this earlier today. Can you just clarify how much has the maximum residential floor area ratio changed in the area bounding around Allen, Douglas, Brantwood? Would you know that?
Through you, Mayor Burton, if you could give us a moment just to kind of pull that out. I have some...
Joe's looking at me like he knows the answer. It jumped out at me that you're using a 450 to 549, and I never really saw the difference between where we were to where we are. And I'd like to get to sleep tonight knowing that.
That's totally fair. We're just getting it looked at. In terms of residential floor area, one change that you'll see that's occurred is that we've incorporated the garage floor area. So if you see an inflation, that's part of that. And we've also made sure that the residential floor area is linked to the lot area. And so it's really going to be, when you take a look at a specific area, you're going to see, okay, what's the area of that lot? And then that will correspond to the residential floor area that it will be tied to.
Right. So you're saying that what looks like fairly significant increases is relative to the incorporation of the garage.
Correct.
And what's the other part?
And the size of the lot. So it's tied directly to the size of the lot, and that's part of that right zoning that we're doing, is that instead of just looking at a zone label, you take a look, it's a combination of what you're zoned and how big your lot is. We'll have a house that's appropriate for that size of lot.
Okay. Well, I like the theory, but I would like to understand the differential.
I'm joined here by Matt Rubik. He's a senior zoning examiner who's been a key player in this project, and I knew he would be able to pull up the data for me, so thank you.
No pressure, Matt.
Thank you. Good evening, Council and Mayor Burton. To answer your question through you, Mayor Burton, a typical lot in that location is approximately 655 square meters. So the current requirement for residential floor area ratio is 41%, and that would be changing to 49% under the proposed regulations, which incorporate the garage area.
Okay, thank you very much for that information.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McNeese, your turn.
Thank you, through your worship. I just had an inquiry from a resident not too long ago as to why we're keeping the floor area ratio as a metric in there, and Burlington and a few others have dropped it in favor of lot coverage. But would you mind maybe just highlighting sort of the importance of keeping floor area ratio?
Through you, Mayor Burton, thank you for that question. So at the town of Oakville, we have multiple mechanisms to regulate the size and built form of a home. And so you've already mentioned lot coverage, which is a tool. We have side yards, and we also have residential floor area. And when you take a look at lot coverage, it's for just the portion of the home that covers the lot on the ground. And then when you add in residential floor area, it adds that second floor. And it really works to allow for articulation, step backs, and changes to the size and built form. At this point in time, we haven't had comprehensive changes to the official plan that would lead to a change, such as removing the residential floor area. But in the fullness of time, as the zoning bylaw goes through its comprehensive review, and we have a subsequent comprehensive zoning bylaw review, that could be reevaluated. But at this time, in the context of this review, it is still considered appropriate to maintain in the zoning bylaw.
Okay, thank you. And my understanding is it also helps with neighborhood character and, as you said, I think articulation of that second floor so that it doesn't have the chance of all becoming uniform. Is that proper understanding, or?
Through you, Mayor Burton, I agree that we have strong policies within the official plan at this point that speak to a neighborhood character, and that would assist with that goal.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Nethery, thank you very much for all your work on this work. Council appreciates it, and it's a testimony to how good you did that we had no questions for you.
Field and Mr. Rubik in particular, who's not a frequent council speaker, have done an excellent job at distilling all of this information and bringing it together into a final comprehensive draft for everybody. And yeah, it's still really nice to be able to come back for what appeared to be alumni night for town staff. If I'd known, I'd have brought balloons or something. So it's a really great job by this team who have really come together and are growing in this regard. And it should bode really well for some really exciting projects that I think are going to be on council's agenda over the next few years here.
It feels good to see such distinguished alumni as yourself. Thank you, sir. All right, Council, I'm going to put the vote. Is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The motion carries. And that brings us to new business. If anybody has any new business to discuss or requests for reports. And in that case, we have three bylaws, 2026, 82, 88, and 96, to consider, read, and pass. Can I have a motion for consideration and reading? Councillor Dudek and Councillor Longo. And is there any objection? There being none, those bylaws are considered read and passed. And that ends the work of this meeting. Thank you very much to everybody for the diligence and the attention that we all gave this. And I have enjoyed very much working with you, and I look forward to the next opportunity. Good night.